I think BYU has a built-in edge. A lot of people view it as a disadvantage. I always viewed it as an advantage. Our academics, our honor code, the lifestyle is a positive for people who want that kind of thing.
Welcome. My name is Mike Lacey, and I am grateful to have the illustrious, we talk about Taysom Hill as being the jackknife of football, but Mr. Val Hale is the jackknife of life, because this guy has done so many interesting, successful things in his life, one of which is a recent book that came out. Val, welcome to be here. Thank you for being here.
Well, Mike, it's a pleasure. And you and I go way back, so it's really fun to spend a little time together talking and reminiscing, not only about yesteryear, but maybe about today and what's going on in this crazy world of college sport.
Think about, I'd love to go there. In fact, don't let us forget about talking about now and the future, because this man, among many other things, was athletic director during a critical time in BYU's tenure. In fact, when did you start as athletic director?
I became athletic director in 1999. I had been assistant.
So right before LaVell Edwards retired?
Yes, I was LaVell's boss for 2 years.
So you're the guy that wouldn't pay him enough money.
That's right. It's true. But yes, from 99 to 04, I was athletic director. I had been assistant athletic director for 10 years previous to that.
Okay.
And then actually started working.
Was that under Rondo Felberg?
I worked with Ron. I worked with 3 different athletic directors.
Oh, really?
So I worked with Glenn Tuckett. I started as an intern in the sports information office in 1980, Jim McMahon's junior year.
Right.
And then I worked for Glenn up until 1993. And then Clayne Jensen was athletic director for 2 years, worked with Clayne, and then Rondo for 4 years before I became.
And then you came in.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about the many, many things that happened during your tenure. Who came in right after you?
Tom Homo.
Really?
Yes. I hired Tom, and I hired Brian Santiago, and brought Tom in, and Tom was selected to replace me.
So you don't have any opinions on the things that are going on presently in athletics, BYU sports, the NCAA, NIL?
I have plenty of opinions. I used to joke that a lot of the critics, are people who have all of the answers but none of the facts. So I try to not be one of those fans that opines too heavily without knowing all of the backstory, the truth. But, it's kind of crazy to see what's happened today, which we can talk about a little bit later. But over that 24 years that I was there in the program, a lot of things happened. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is that, I would tell stories to my friends about what had happened and things I was part of. And they would always say, you need to write a book. You need to write those stories down.
I'm so glad you did, because I promise you, I have not read the whole book, but the few chapters that I read thoroughly, I was so impressed. Like, wow, you brought some real surprises or very interesting stories behind the scenes that, I think most of our Cougar fans are going to be very interested in reading.
Well, that's what I tried to do. I didn't want to go into like a rehash of the games,
right,
and even necessarily athletes. I could have written 2 or 3 other volumes, and maybe I will someday, about other aspects of the program. But I wanted to tell stories that they may not be familiar with, that they may not be aware of. It's kind of a peek behind the curtain of the department and how things get done, how you work with the administration in athletics to make things happen. And there are a lot of levers that have to be pulled at BYU, politics that need to be, negotiated. And so I thought that's what fans would enjoy reading. And so far, the feedback's been pretty good.
What little I've read, I've loved it. And thank you. Thank you for doing that work. Have you written any other books before?
This is my third book. So the first book I wrote was a book called Touchdowns, Tip-Offs, and Testimonies with Floyd Johnson. Floyd is a legend at BYU.
We have talked about Floyd before, and yes, you are right. He is a legend. Please elaborate.
Well, he would go out and tell these stories. When I was in high school, I heard him come to our seminary for a morning side, shared these amazing stories, and so when I got to BYU, I was over publications initially, and I went to Floyd and said, Floyd, you need to do a book about with your stories. And he said, well, I just don't know how to do that. And I said, okay, I'm going to write this book with you. So I would go to his office at 5:30 every morning, and he would tell stories. I would record them, and then I compiled them, edited them, and we published this book called Touchdowns, Tip-Offs, and Testimonies, and I published it myself, took out a loan from my in-laws.
Really? Touchdowns?
Touchdowns, Tip-Offs, and Testimonies was the name of it, and I had publishers that said, oh, that's not going to sell. People don't want to hear somebody just tell stories. We sold 10,000 copies of that book. It was a bestseller in the state of Utah that year. I knew if every one of Floyd's friends bought a book, it'd be a bestseller, and it was. So that one did really well. That was in 1989.
Let me share something for those who aren't aware of Floyd Johnson. Floyd Johnson, he wasn't the equipment manager, was he? What was he?
Yeah, he was equipment manager.
All right, he was equipment manager. Vi Sikahema brought this up when we talked with Vi, and he said, if you wanted a good pair of shoes or socks, you had to be on Floyd's good side. And that's not necessarily true, but he was the guy who called the shots on, and he was over... He called the shots on equipment. He was over in college athletics. It was interesting to me. We'd get a bag, and all your undergarments for your football uniform, could be in this mesh bag. You'd throw it in after every practice. It'd be washed and tidied up right there for you, so that in the next practice you had clean, not smelly, uniform. Undergarments. And so anyway, Floyd was critical, but Floyd had another job that to me was really interesting that he took on himself. And frequently this was with returned missionaries, but if you got grabbed by Floyd and asked, hey, come here, I've got this seminary up in Midway, up in Heber, or even up in Bozeman, Montana, or down in Arizona, and I'd like you to. I'm asking you to go speak to this state conference of youth or a big seminary gathering, and so he would ask football and basketball players. I'm sure athletes. Once I spoke with Dane Iorge, who's a baseball player.
Yeah.
And even though it was a job, you always appreciated being on Floyd's list of, the guys who you share your touchdowns and your testimony. And it was a fun way to share BYU with kids all over the West.
Yeah. In the book, I quote Mark Durant as saying when he passed away, when Floyd passed away, saying that he was the most influential person in the history of BYU athletics.
Wow.
I think the way he says it is he influenced more people than anyone in the history of BYU athletics.
I don't doubt so.
He was the guy that would sit in his little equipment office, and it's kind of a line of players outside his door that would go in and talk to him about their personal issues.
You're right.
And, whether they should go on a mission or whether they should get married to this girl. He became the father figure, and he led and influenced many, many young men and even young women, to look at the church and eventually join the church. He was quite a man. And I go into quite a bit
humbly involved in all of that. So yeah, you tell that story in there.
Yeah, I tell a lot, and I tell some of his stories out of the book that we wrote, just a few, because that book's no longer in print, and a lot of people don't know who Floyd is, so I go into a little bit of detail about Floyd and what he did.
just to confirm what you're talking about, Vi Sikahema again, and Danny Frazier was there with us that day. And so Vi told us the story about going in to talk to Floyd, and Vi was considering going on a mission or not. Wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Well, so who did he go to?
Floyd.
He went to Floyd. But anyway, when he went to talk to Floyd, Floyd had just received a letter from Elder Danny Frazier, and this is only a few years after the revelation on the priesthood. So here's Danny Frazier, a black LDS ex-football player because he broke his neck in a football game.
In the A&M game, yeah.
But one of the most favorite people, he was a fan favorite and a student favorite at BYU. Anyway, Danny wrote a letter from his mission. And he, tongue-in-cheek, wrote, "The field is black," because he was in Oakland, California. "The field is black, already harmless." And it struck Vi Sikahema in such a way that I think Vi said something like, "I need to go on a mission now."
Yeah. Yeah. I tell a little bit of the story about Vi in here and his conversation with Floyd. And
wow.
Yeah, it's fun. Those are the type of stories that I like to tell. So I wrote that book, and that was a great seller. And then about a decade ago, I wrote a book called Living a Life That Matters, 7 Keys for Purposeful Living.
Wow.
It's still on Amazon, but over the years, I had worked with so many successful people and met with business leaders, athletic coaches, leaders, etc. And I always enjoyed listening to them and learning what made them successful. And so I kind of kept a list of things, and these 7 keys for purposeful living were things that I had noticed in these highly successful people and things that they did. And so I just decided to write that book, and a publisher, Cedar Fort Publishing, helped me publish it. And so that was a fun project.
And it's still on Amazon.
Still on Amazon.
Good
you
for
still
you.
get it. It's still in print and in circulation. And then I decided to do this one.
I love, and this one is so interesting and good.
Oh, thank you.
And what we're trying to do with Beyond the Game is tell those stories. And so thank you for being here, because I don't know where to go. You probably have a million stories you can share with us.
I could talk all day, and that's why my friends would always say, "You need to write a book. You've got all these stories, and history doesn't know about this." I mean,
Sure.
A lot of them are things that people don't know about, and I'll just throw one out there.
Cool.
In the early 90s, I was driving with LaVell to the Salt Lake to a luncheon, and LaVell turns to me and he says, "Val, I've been talking with the administration about possibly assuming the athletic director title along with being head football coach."
What year was this?
I don't know the exact year. I can't remember. But
in the 80s or 90s?
It was in the early 90s.
Okay.
And he said, "If that happens, I can't do both jobs, and do them justice. So would you be willing to run the athletic department and then do the day-to-day functions of running the athletic department?"
Let me interrupt you for a minute.
Okay.
Because I remember back in those days, there was a head coach, it seems like at Pittsburgh or one of the really big schools, and I'm forgetting his name, but I can kind of see his face, who did that very thing, who was the head coach and took the athletic director position, I believe, so that the pay scale could be a little bit higher.
Yeah, and it wasn't all that uncommon. In fact, Stan Watts, when he hired LaVell Edwards, was both the athletic director and the basketball coach.
Okay.
So, I mean, it wasn't all that uncommon, especially for legendary coaches, and you're right. It gives them a little more prestige, allows them to be paid more. But so LaVell apparently had been having some kind of conversation, and he asked if I would be willing to run the department while he was athletic director.
The titular head.
Yes, he was the titular head and continuing to coach the football office. So I was kind of surprised, but I said, "Sure, coach, I would be happy to do anything that you'd like." Well, the bottom line is that never materialized. I mean, I don't know if I don't know if LaVell just decided, no, I don't want the hassle of doing that, or if the administration decided, no, we're not going to do that right now. But, that was an interesting thing. If LaVell had been the athletic director,
you would have been effective.
Well, I would have been there, but he would have been the AD he could have served as AD through the 90s, which would have been an interesting thing. And LaVell was such a great guy. One thing LaVell wasn't, he did not like controversy. And sometimes as athletic director, you have to,
really
encounter controversy.
Really? Did you ever have
occasionally? There are fans who don't like things that you do. But anyway, it would have been an interesting thing. I talk about in the book, here's another thing. I was reading the other day a letter from my son who was on his mission, and I would write these letters. They were much better than a journal because I'd tell him everything that was going on. So I was reading these letters as I was doing research for this book to try to remember stories I had forgotten. Well, then I tell him that Gary Crowton is looking to hire a new defensive coordinator. This was when Ken Schmidt, was leaving. And he's focused on two individuals, a guy named Bronco Mendenhall and Kyle Whittingham at the U. And he wants to talk to both of them, and he's reached out.
Was there interest on both sides?
Well, so he reached out apparently to Urban Meyer. This was 2003, I think. And Urban, I said in the letter, because I don't remember all the details now, but in the letter, I said Urban Meyer really doesn't want to let Kyle go. That's what Gary told me. And so I don't know how far along that conversation got, because Urban may have really put the kibosh on it, or I don't know if Gary actually called Kyle and talked through it with him, but, he ultimately hired Bronco. But there again, you think about how interesting history would have been if he had been able to convince Kyle to come to BYU as a defensive coordinator. That would have changed a lot of things.
That would have changed
over the last 25 years.
That's right.
But those are kind of some fun things that have happened behind the scenes that I talk about in the book a little bit.
There was another surprise that I read, I think in the Deseret News, that was interesting to me because I don't know if that had been revealed before. Do you know what I'm talking about?
About Andy Reid?
Yes.
Yeah. So when we were trying to find a replacement for LaVell, we interviewed 11 candidates, really good candidates, some internal, several external. And LaVell came to us, and he was not part of the search committee, but he came to me and said, Val, there are two head coaches who've been very successful, or people who I think if you get either one of them, you'll be in great shape, Andy Reid and Gary Crowton. And they were they had risen to the top. And so we reached out to Andy to see if he would like to interview.
How long had he been? At that point, he was Philadelphia's head coach.
Second year.
Okay.
First year, I think they went 5 and, they didn't do really well. They had like 5 wins. But the second year, he was starting to turn it around. And in fact, they eventually played in the NFC Championship game the second year. So I asked Andy if he'd like to interview, and he said, yes, I would. But it's really hard to interview an NFL head coach during the season. I mean, they're working 80, 90-hour weeks. And he said, why don't you and Fred Skousen, because we went together on a lot of these interviews, why don't you come and meet with me in my hotel suite when we play at Arizona, at the Cardinals. So Fred and I flew down very much kind of incognito, trying to be inconspicuous.
So you had your sunglasses on and
wigs. And we met with Andy and Tammy in their apartment, and there were a lot of questions we had about, how interested would he really be? Would he be willing to take a pay cut to come? Well, Andy was obviously very interested in BYU. He loves BYU. And I think that, he said, the money wasn't a problem. He thought we could work through that without any problem. We went through the whole thing. And by the time we left, I was like, wow, this guy, we have a chance. I thought we really have a chance with him. So in order to get hired, you have to have a general authority interview. And I talk about, in the book, I also talk about what we were doing with Crowton. Well, I had brought Crowton here in the summer because we knew LaVell, this was going to be his last season. He had been out here, so I had him go and interview with the general authorities during the summer. But Andy hadn't done that.
You're talking about Gary Crowton?
Yeah, Gary Crowton had come here to Utah in the summer. So while he was here, I said, look, we're going to take you up to have your interview now so that if it turns out that you end up being the guy and you're in your middle of your NFL season, we don't have to deal with it.
So a general authority interview, it piques my interest because certainly BYU is a church-operated school. The Board of Trustees is run by high-level leaders in the church. And the football program is obviously an emissary,
absolutely,
a vanguard for BYU particularly, but therefore the church. So to get a head coach job, at least in football,
any head coach has to be interviewed.
So the women's golf team head coach.
Yep.
Okay.
They have to go up.
Interesting.
Now,
so it's like being a mission president.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, remember, LaVell's replacement, this was like a huge deal. This was the biggest decision that we were going to make in a long time.
I remember it.
So the brethren were obviously very interested in this. So as Andy was going along and we were trying to figure out what to do, it really came down to Andy and Gary. And we had to have Andy do his interview before we could even proceed further to make a decision, to know if we could offer him the job. So I reached out to an alumnus who was a CEO of a large company here in America who had a private jet. And I said, can we borrow your jet to fly a general authority back to Philadelphia? Because Andy couldn't take time to come here.
Right.
He said, yeah. And he knew who.
Even though he's a Utah fan? I'm kidding.
Yeah, that wasn't
the jet we're talking about.
No, it was a different jet.
I'm glad you verified that. Good.
But so I called Andy and I called church headquarters and I said, Andy, I need to know when you're available. We've got a jet ready and we're going to fly one of the Quorum of the 12 out to talk to you and interview you, which we have to do before we can go any further in this process. And when I called him, he says, Val, I feel really bad. I would love to be at BYU, but this is my second year. If I take this job, I'm going to have to let all my assistants go. They're going to all be out, looking.
And they
were
just starting this progress.
They just started.
Yeah.
The organization had taken a gamble on Andy. He wasn't a high-profile guy, but he had impressed them, and they'd kind of stuck their necks out just a little bit in hiring him. He said, I would be disloyal to this organization if I walk away right now, especially since we're having success this year. Like I say, they were winning, and they ended up playing in the championship game that year of the division of the NFC. And so he just said, the timing's not right. I really don't think I can do this. So
many of us Cougar fans now, after the fact, because Andy Reid is now no longer anybody's, he's not a gamble for anybody.
No.
He obviously, every time he opens his mouth, I almost think I'm listening to LaVell.
Yeah, exactly.
And he has the same attitude toward his players, toward other people. He's guarded when he needs to be guarded. He has a subtle sense of humor. So now we can say, oh, dang, we really missed out. But I'm grateful that Mr. Andy Reid has had so much success in the field that he's in.
I thought that eventually, if the timing were right at some point, he would be back at BYU. But, then he went to the Chiefs. They turned things around. It just wasn't right when the job came open at BYU when Bronco left. Andy was in the middle of a great career, and it just didn't work out. But the guy loves BYU.
I know,
and it was really fun. The other thing about Crowton that a lot of people don't understand is he was a very hot commodity at that time.
He really was. His offense, although different than the offense that we were familiar with at that point, had really made some big inroads. I, as a fan, kind of saw it as a very high-risk offense that wouldn't move the chains as much as maybe score a lot. But when you had really good cornerbacks, his teams did get shut down by super strong defensive teams.
Yeah.
But he was such a hot commodity. I remember that, and I remember being excited. Okay, we've got a new offense coming in, and there was good and bad about that.
Yeah, he interviewed for the New England Patriots head job right before he came to BYU.
Wow.
They gave it to Bill Belichick.
Who's that?
As a choice. I mean, I've never heard of the guy. But he interviewed, and a lot of people assumed that he was going to be an NFL head coach in the very near future.
No, he had great success.
And when he
one
came
of the
here,
innovators of the spread offense.
when he came here that first year in 2001 with both Luke Staley and Brandon Doman. And here's another story I tell in the book. So we hire Crowton, known as this pass-happy offense guy. Well, Luke Staley comes in my office, and he says,
should I leave?
It says, this coach throws the ball 70 times a game. I'm a running back. I mean, is it going to be best for me to transfer, to go somewhere else? Because I may never get the ball. And I said, Luke, Gary's smart enough to recognize the talent that you are. I wouldn't be in too much of a hurry to leave and go somewhere else. Give the guy a chance to show you what he can do. And so fortunately, Luke stuck around and ended up winning the Doak Walker Award.
Yeah, and I'm curious now because you'll have this answer, and it presents a question for me. Luke Staley was really good on the RPO, the run-pass option. Brandon Doman was masterful at running it. And so even though we had a good pass offense, that RPO really allowed Luke Staley to use his speed and athleticism to score a lot of long touchdowns. Was RPO part of Gary Crowton's offense in the past?
I think a version of it. A lot of it was because Brandon was so good at running the option. He had been an option quarterback in high school.
Right.
And Luke had freakish speed. And he was so big, he didn't look like he could really be that fast, but he had another gear, and people would take the wrong angle on him all the time, and he would just shift gears, and he was gone.
Oh.
And, here's a guy who was 230 pounds and could run a 4.3 40. And, I mean, just amazing talent. And so they could use him in a lot of ways. He could catch passes. He could get outside. He could go inside. I really believe if he hadn't had bad knees, he would have been in the NFL for a long time and one of the best backs in the league.
Now, it's been a while, and I've slept a few times, but he had a big ankle injury. Was it a broken ankle or?
Well,
at the end of that season.
Yeah, it was a knee, I think.
Oh,
okay. It was a knee. I can't remember for sure. He was just kind of injury prone that way. He had bad knees, and I think he had hurt it before, and I think he hurt it again in that Mississippi State game. The second to the last play of the game.
Yes.
Picks up a first down, gets us in field goal range, and he gets hurt. And then we go to Hawaii, and without him, they just came after us.
We were more one-dimensional.
One-dimensional. The last two games we lost, and it just showed the value of Luke and how important he was.
Let's reflect now, because that team, that first year of Gary Crowton, had been undefeated.
Yeah, and there was all this talk about, whether we could bust the BCS and get into the championship.
The bowl championship series. And yesterday we had Robbie Bosco here, and we were talking about how BYU and our 1984 national championship caused the powers that be within the NCAA to make these different progressions, trying to keep out these unworthy teams, right?
Yeah. Yep. And they weren't about to let us in.
Even if we had won those last two.
If we'd won those last two, they would have had a really hard time keeping us out. But I remember in 96 going back to New York with LaVell, and we were back at a function, and that was the year we were doing really well. We had the one loss.
Yes.
And we were back there, and they invited LaVell, and I accompanied him to go over to the TV studios, and they brought several of the coaches of the teams that were potential candidates to play in the game. And we didn't know for sure. We were keeping our fingers crossed. We were right up there, and I think we were in the top 10 at the time. And they picked us up in a car at our hotel, took us over to the studio, and then they made the announcement that, and BYU wasn't included, and it was like everybody just went away and left LaVell standing there. And
these are the other coaches.
Well, the other coaches and the TV executives.
Okay.
So it was like I felt really bad because it was kind of insulting to LaVell. I mean, we got left out, but they just kind of disappeared. And LaVell and I are standing there, and we ended up saying, well, okay, let's go get a taxi and go back. And, I felt really bad for LaVell because, it was like immediately, since we didn't make it into the playoff, everybody just gravitated to other people, to the ones who had, and they just left LaVell standing there kind of like, okay. And we literally walked out, got a taxi, went back to the hotel, and everybody was disappointed, obviously.
You mean everybody, the BYU contingent?
Yeah. All of the BYU fans and everybody, we had our hopes up. And
yes,
the media had, kept asking, is there anything you can do? Is there anything you can do to get in this? And would you be willing to sue the BCS? And I made the comment once that the WAC back in the day had talked about maybe suing the BCS, but not that we would. But so immediately there's a headline, BYU Athletic Director says BYU is going to sue the BCS. And that story ran around the country. But anyway, it was a mess. It was unfortunate.
Yeah, sad, unfortunate. But if anybody could take that, LaVell did.
Yeah, he would. LaVell was always a gentleman, always classy, and he didn't get angry. That just wasn't his style.
And I wonder about all those coaches and executives maybe feeling a little bit embarrassed.
Yeah, I think so.
That, we left him out, not fair, but okay, we're going to do our bad deed and then get away.
I think that's exactly what happened. I think everybody knew LaVell had gotten the shaft, and they just didn't want to have to go over and face him.
Yeah.
And admit it.
That's interesting, isn't it? It's a good problem to have. Was that one loss to Washington that year?
Washington.
Right. And what a great year that was. We ended up winning in the Cotton Bowl against Kansas State.
Yeah.
And having one of the best years we've had. Steve Sarkisian was our quarterback.
I would say if I had to rate the teams over the years.
Be careful.
I know. It's tough, but I think offensively the 83 team was phenomenal. Steve Young and Gordon Hudson and those guys. In fact, we had the best punter in the country in Lee Johnson.
Right.
But he didn't even qualify for the statistics.
We
never punted. And they were phenomenal, and we had a pretty good defense. As you know, LaVell gets all this credit for great offenses, but during the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, we had some tremendous defenses. And that was a great team. Obviously, the 84 team was good, but, I think the 85 team may have been better.
Really?
The 85 team had a phenomenal defense. The problem in 80.
What was our record in 85?
Well, we lost to UCLA in a game here in LaVell Edwards Stadium, Cougar Stadium at the time. We were winning in the fourth quarter. They threw a long pass right at the end of the game, and our DB let them get behind him. They threw a pass down the field, and they scored with just seconds left to beat us. And
they were actually at that game.
And they went on to win the Pac-12, Pac-10, go to the Rose Bowl. They were a good team. We didn't lose again until UTEP.
And I remember that game.
UTEP had won one game in 2 years.
But there were some big controversies that happened after that game. Do you have an opinion or actual knowledge
I don't know. It was crazy because the rumor was that they were stealing our play calls.
Electronically.
And that there were a couple of times when they they appeared to know exactly what was going to happen, picked off Bosco, ran it back for a touchdown. But here's an interesting thing is right at the end of the game, we were marching down the field, and there was like 20 or 30 seconds left. Bosco, on our last play, he had a guy open. I think it was Kozlowski or somebody. I don't know if going across the middle. It would have been a big chunk of yardage, but he chose to go to the end zone. So he kind of heaved it up into the end zone. Well, their guy intercepted it. It was almost like he could fair catch it. He intercepted it in the end zone, game over. Years later, Jay Monson called me into his office. He was our broadcast guy, and he goes, "Watch this." And he was playing that last play, and the guy from UTEP goes to catch the ball, and Jay slowed it down real slow, and the ball actually went through the guy's hand, hits the turf, and bounces right back up into his hands.
You're kidding.
When you slow it down, it was not an interception. In today's world, it would have been over. We would have had another couple of plays and maybe won the game. But he showed that to me, and sure enough, the guy dropped the ball. But in real speed, you couldn't tell. It was just like boom, boom, and he comes up with the ball. But it hit the ground, bounced right back up into his arms.
Isn't that amazing?
And so, crazy.
There were so many controversies about that game, but that happened so long ago, and it was a loss that we never should have. That happens.
We would have played in the New Year's Day bowl game. I mean, at that time we were in the top 10, climbing, and we would have played in New Year's game. As it was, we went to the game in Orlando. What was it? Not the Tangerine Bowl, Florida Citrus Bowl. And we lost the game 10-7 because at the time Bosco was hurt. And
he was injured a lot of that season.
Yeah. Teams figured out to beat BYU, you don't need to rush a lot of people because he wouldn't run. Bosco wasn't going to run. He couldn't throw the ball deep because he didn't have the arm strength. So everybody just took away the whole middle. And Ohio State's only touchdown was when the nose guard dropped back and picked off a pass and ran it back for 7 points. And then they kicked a field goal, I think, off a turnover 2 or something. And we scored 1 touchdown, and that's how they beat us. But we had a great defense that year.
All right. You were the athletic director during a time of great growth. I mean, as you and I were talking, the student athlete building was built during your tenure. The practice facility was built. What were some of those other additions that?
Well, the Miller Park, the baseball softball.
The wonderful. Complex. It's a beautiful baseball park. Yes.
Yeah, that was wonderful. We got the Millers to come on board and build that beautiful facility. And then the student athlete building and the indoor practice facility were huge additions.
Yeah.
And, the reason a lot of that happened was that President Bateman really got behind it. Oftentimes the athletic director gets a lot of the credit, but if you don't have a president who is extremely supportive of athletics and willing to take things to the board of trustees, it's not going to happen. And he was very supportive of it and helped us get approval, and so we were able to raise the money for that. We also put in seats in the east stands of the stadium where it says BYU. We added those, what we called at that time, legacy seats. And interestingly enough, we generated enough revenue from those seats it was the equivalent financially of adding a whole 7th home football game. We made enough money just off those seats that it was enough basically to cover one other football game financially. It was huge. And then we did the same thing in basketball with the courtside Cougar seats. We decided we were going to try to turn those into some revenue-generating seats, and we met with some donors, did some focus groups, and decided that we were going to charge $3,500 per seat, which BYU had never done anything.
And at that point, that was a lot more than in today's dollars.
Yeah. Well, and today, those same seats are $20,000 for the front row per seat and $10,000 for the back rows. But to give you an idea of how much money that generated for us, we increased our basketball ticket revenues by 1/3 by adding just those 3 rows of seats there on the floor.
You mean we used to call it the pit?
Yeah.
All right. And what'd you do? Fill that in or just?
Filled it in. The front row, I think, was still down at the time. I can't remember. But I think we had three rows of seats there, and there were like 400 seats, something like that.
So here in the Marriott Center on I guess that's the north side.
The north side, it would have been in front of the students back in the day.
Correct.
Not so much today. But yeah, I mean, we were able to do that. And in order to buy the seats, you had to be a minimum of $1,000 a year donor to the Cougar Club. So when you add it all up, it was a huge boost to us financially. Now, like I say, today, the seats in football on the east stands, those seats cost $3,000 a piece. And the seats on
for your annual season ticket fee.
That's just to buy the seat. I don't know what they have to be from a Cougar Club standpoint.
I thought you said $20,000 for the front row.
That's for basketball.
Oh, got it.
The basketball seats. So $20,000 and $10,000 for the ones behind.
Wow.
And then for football, now you have those seats that are $3,000 a seat in the blue seats, and that now you've seen where they've created off to the sides of those some seats with tables. Have you seen that? That's $6,000 a seat to get one.
We see those. I'm in the west stands, and so I see those tables just to the north of the bigger seats in the middle. That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's the whole revenue money thing is taken over. And they just have to find ways to generate more revenue.
This will be an interesting thing to discuss, because as athletic director, you had to thread the needle on the issues of, hey, we're a university that's sponsored by a church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and Jesus was all about, we're we're helping the poor, and so you have a church. Now, heaven knows that in our missionary program, we spend money.
Yeah.
You have to.
Absolutely.
A lot, Relatively speaking, we have to spend money, but that's not obvious. Nobody sees where all the mission presidents live, and you don't know about all the different costs of flying missionaries back and forth and the costs. So anyway, and that's not a money-making prospect or project. That's take the gospel to the whole world. It's a mission.
Right.
Now, in football or basketball or in any sport, the casual observer could look and say, hey, wait, what are you spending money, even if it's from a donor, on these worldly things when you should be doing X, Y, or Z? And and so how did you thread that needle? Because in my mind, it's obviously an important issue. The camaraderie, what athletics does for a university, and even for let's call it the fan base, but for the people that follow, to me, that's money well worth it, just like a missionary expenditure would be. But did you have to be careful in how you...
Yeah,
I don't know.
It was a different game back then. When I first started in 1980, when we expanded the stadium in 82, you could buy a season ticket at the very end. We were just trying to top it off, sell it out. You could buy a season ticket for $11.60.
Wow.
That's and there were 5 home games, so a little over $2 a game to sit in those stands. Well, the other day for the Kansas State game, the cheapest seat in the end zones was $100.
Wow.
So you've come a long way.
It's true.
Playing in the
law of supply and demand.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously people want to pay that.
Playing in the WAC was not as expensive. It wasn't as high pressure as today. When Rex Lee came in 1989, he wanted to figure out how to make more money from athletics and even maybe take some of that money and put it in the university. They had heard stories about Texas giving $1 million to the library at the university, and they were like, why can't we do that here? So what they did, interestingly enough, is they brought in Dave Checketts, who had just been let go at the Jazz, but he was the guy who put the whole Jazz thing together.
But wasn't he also involved in the facility in New York?
Yeah, but this was before then.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So he had just been let go at the Jazz.
Okay.
And they brought him to do a study of the athletic department revenue potential. So he came down and met with us, and there was talk about doing more to do advertising. Glenn Tuckett had a statement he used to tell me all the time. We want our games to be plain vanilla. When I say the games, outside the actual game on the field, he wanted no signs in the arena. He wanted nothing going on that would compete with the game on the field.
Right.
And that was the term he used, plain vanilla.
All right, let's contrast that with what happens between the third and fourth quarter, which to me as a fan is just phenomenal.
So,
but I can understand plain vanilla, and I can also understand we're entertaining.
Yeah. And so part of it is, so after, there was even talk about having Checketts replace Tuckett because they wanted to go a different direction. Tuckett was very opinionated, and the question was, will he adapt and change? And so we started to add more things to our events. Unfortunately, Glenn came along, and adapted. But today, when you charge the amount of money we're charging for our ticket prices, you better have entertainment.
You better entertain the group.
Exactly. I mean, the game the other night with the drones and everything else, it was like phenomenal.
It was.
But, back in the day, Glenn would have had an aneurysm watching that kind of stuff going on.
Bless his heart. Right?
But yeah, I mean, he was a great guy. It was just a different time. But in this day and age, if you're going to charge what we charge for tickets now, you better have a great event. Otherwise, people will say, I'm going to stay home and watch it on TV.
Well, and that was me in the prior years. I mean, hey, if I watch it on TV, I can look at the replays. I can, go into the kitchen or put the game on pause. But now I wouldn't miss it. I mean, you read in social media about these concerts, I don't know, Taylor Swift, for example, and the extreme things that they'll do to entertain the audience. My heavens, I'm thinking that BYU and what we do, and I say we, but the school athletic department is truly entertaining us.
I'll tip their hat to them. I mean, I was in charge of that for years, and it was right when we were trying to kind of come out of it.
Make that transition.
Here's a funny story. So, one of the first things that we did when we got it approved is I was able to go out and sell PA announcements so the people, companies could do something on the PA. And I remember writing the memo to Glenn Tuckett saying, okay, here's the deal. I've sold this ad to this company for $300, and so you can have Clarence Robinson, who was the PA announcer at the time, read this during the second timeout, da-da-da-da-da-da. And then at the bottom, I put the PA announcement, what it was going to be. So Glenn, and this is the first time, he goes over and he hands it to Robbie, and Clarence Robinson reads the whole memo over the PA announcement. He reads the whole memo, and the next day I get a call from the advertiser. That was really tacky that you told people how much we're paying for this. Well, we've obviously come a long way from that.
$300. Oh my heavens, that's funny.
But my hat's off to the marketing team there because they do it. I don't know of any other school out there that does it better than what we do.
They don't. One of the beautiful things that I read in your book hit home with me. And, we as human beings can all be disappointed. I've felt that way with, some organizations because we're all people, we're all people. And you reveal something very intriguing, and then your response to it is what's so intriguing to me because you came out of something that could have been really sour for the rest of your life, but it was the way you were dismissed, which to me seemed very, very unfair. And I remember the circumstances behind it. But the way you dealt with it and what happened subsequently is a lesson for all of us on how we can take disappointment or even betrayal from people who otherwise should be more supportive. So how did you take something that was, to me, so maybe unfair or out of the blue and deal with it in such a positive way?
Well, the last chapter of the book, as you know, goes into quite a bit of detail about what happened. And it's kind of hard to write because it's very personal. But I wanted fans to know, and the Deseret News said that dismissal was the 5th biggest story in the state of Utah in 2004, the biggest news story. So top 5 news story in the state of Utah. It was very public.
It's a big deal.
And yeah, I mean, I'd been there for 24 years. We'd done some good things in the athletic department, like you mentioned. We had accomplished.
I think our football team had just beaten Notre Dame.
We just beat Notre Dame,
right?
The Saturday before.
Facilities that you had generated revenues for and done, and
then I go in.
No good deed goes unpunished.
Yes,
sorry, I'll shut up.
So I go walking in for what I think is my, just my annual or weekly meeting, and I hand the vice president my agenda that I want to talk about, and he hands it back and says, "Val, I've got some bad news for you. We're going to let you go." And it was kind of, out of the blue. It was like, whoa. And he said, "We're going to have a press conference in 2 hours and announce the change." And, it just shocked me. I mean, I hadn't even had a chance. I tried to track down my kids and tell them, and I wasn't able to get a hold of one of them, and left messages for another. And I had to call my wife, who was teaching school, and she couldn't leave her class, so I ended up telling her over the phone in front of her class, and she starts crying, and in front of her school kids, and they're all concerned. But anyway, we went home, my wife and I, and we just sat on the couch, and we said, we have a choice. We can be bitter or we can be better, and we can let this define us, or we cannot let it define us. And we choose not to let it define us. We're not going to be bitter. We're going to remain upbeat and positive, and we're just going to move on, because you know what? They had the right to fire us. I was an at-will employee, and I had told them before I didn't want to be athletic director for 1 minute longer than they wanted me. If they ever got tired of me or wanted to make a change, I told them, just let me know and I'll resign the next day, which was an agreement we had, which they hadn't kept. I was kind of ticked off about that. But we then, so we made that decision. And I just decided I'm not going to be critical. I'm not going to badmouth anybody. We're going to move on with our life. And years later, Matt Holland shared something with me that I thought was great advice. He said, how you leave a job is more important than how you come into a job, because it affects your future.
And Matt Holland is a friend also of Matt and Paige are super good friends with my wife and I. And I respect his opinions and philosophical approach to life the same way as his father, Elder Jeffrey Holland. I still call him President Holland because he was president of our university. But yes, say that again, because that advice was...
It's great advice. How you leave a job is more important than how you come into a job. And so the fact that I was upbeat and positive, I remember meeting with the newspaper reporters, and they're all, kind of coming to my house, clamoring around, trying to put a microphone in front of me, getting me to say something that they can put on the news, and something angry. And I was just upbeat and positive and
phenomenal,
joking with them. And, for years I had people come up to me. I still do to this day, strangers who come up to me and say, I have complete respect for the way you left BYU. I didn't feel like it was fair. I didn't feel like it was right. But the way you handled that just really impressed me. And I believe that it opened the doors that I had to later become vice president at UVU. I don't think that would have happened if I had thrown a tantrum when I went to work for Governor Herbert, overseeing the Office of Economic Development. I don't think that would have happened. And so all those doors opened because I think I chose that path. And I just wasn't going to let it make me mad.
I so respect that, Val. And, when I saw my season tickets aren't far from yours to the football program. And then when I read this, I thought, here's Val Hale and his family coming to the games where he could be bitter. He could hold a grudge. And what an example. Similar again to what I think a person like LaVell Edwards would do. So thank you for that example of, because every organization we're part of is still full of human beings, just like you and I, you and me. And we're all subject to making mistakes. For example, those bibs.
Yes,
that was during your tenure.
The Bibs, yes.
The Bibs.
That was my first.
You still hear about that too, I see in the, the paper and things.
Yes, my first game as athletic director was the unveiling of the Bibs. Now, I really have to place the blame on LaVell because Nike came to him and said, we have this crazy idea. How do you feel about it? And LaVell was like, even his eyes got wide. But LaVell, he wasn't one to say no. And he
Nike,
finally
right?
caved. Yeah, he finally caved. But yeah, the whole Bibs and the school color thing is interesting.
Because you added brown or,
little tan.
Yeah, the
little tan to it.
Right.
So
and I said you.
Yeah.
Nike.
The school.
Right.
So what happened was we could not get our fans to wear royal blue. You'd go to the games and it was just green, pink, anything but royal blue. And the bookstore reported that they would sell more pink BYU attire than royal blue. We started offering discounts, even giving away blue T-shirts and things, trying to get people to wear.
I'm not wearing my royal blue today, but I enjoy our royal blue colors.
It's great now.
Yeah, now.
Dale Murphy tells the story, and I use this in the book, where when he came back from playing baseball, he bought season tickets, bought all his family these BYU outfits, royal blue, goes to the first game, and he said, I'm sitting there looking around. Nobody around me is wearing royal blue. He said, we felt conspicuous. It was right. We felt out of place. And he shared that in a Cougar Club board meeting once. So anyway, we kept trying to do all these things to drum up support for royal blue. People wouldn't wear it. So we finally said, okay, well, let's look at maybe changing the color to a more fashionable color, a darker blue. So we brought in a company out of New York, a design company. They helped us change they came up with a new logo, and we came up with a color idea. Ultimately, the color was chosen by somebody in Salt Lake. And fortunately, it was the color that we were kind of hoping it would be. And so they came in and changed the color, and our sales went boom.
Really?
And people started wearing the colors, went out and bought it. And we went from probably last in the country in terms of royalty sales of our school merchandise. We just rocketed up the charts, and our fans started wearing them. And then, like everything else, pretty soon retro became fashionable again. So we started, people started pulling out the old royal blue occasionally. And then Bronco came in and, tried to revive the old logo, the blue, the Cougar over the BYU. I mean, everybody hated that back in the late 90s.
70s and 80s.
And the Sailor Cougar hat.
Oh, yeah.
People hated that too.
Right.
But as often happens, retro became cool again. And so now royal blue is fashionable. People like it. People wear it. They wouldn't do that before.
Not back then.
And so now we got the best of both worlds, because you've got the darker blue,
right,
like you have, and you've got royal blue.
This was the closest thing to the bib. Yeah, you had this dark blue that came down, and then the rest was white or tan.
And they changed the rules the next year, so
right.
they couldn't do it, which was nice.
They were
it gave us an excuse to tell Nike.
Sell more merchandise.
Yes. So anyway, it was a fun thing. I love the fact that people now come to the games in school colors.
I do
It's
too.
awesome. It wasn't that way before.
Val, I've kept you for a long time, but there was one more thing that you had some probably some strong or good information on, and it's the past where the NCAA was there to make sure we didn't make any money as athletes because we wanting us to be amateurs versus today. And then the contrast, I mean, I love what BYU's doing in order to be competitive on the athletic field. And I think you can justify it with the revenues and things. But what are your feelings about, for example, what's going on the basketball program? Because it's wonderful to think, oh man, I'm so excited about this basketball season. I'm so excited about the football season where we're taping this and BYU is presently 7-0. And we're, in 2 days, we play Central Florida in a big game.
Huge game.
And Central Florida has a great running game. We looked a little suspect against the run. So the odds makers have even UCF because it's at their home. But what are your opinions on what's going on? And we as Cougar fans, should we be excited? Should we be worried?
Well, we kind of have to play the game now, play the cards that are dealt. Playing in the WAC, as I mentioned, was a whole different experience than playing in the Big 12. You're playing with the big boys now, and unfortunately, it's a lot about money. Even more so now with NIL and transfer portal and all of that, it's made money even more important. I've been a little surprised, at like the salary that was reported offered to Kevin Young. I don't know if that's really
Which
what
may
it was.
maybe fact or maybe fiction.
Maybe fiction. When LaVell was our coach, when I became athletic director, LaVell was the second lowest paid coach in the Mountain West Conference. And he was not even making $200,000 a year. I mean, it was like high 100,000 something. And he was the fourth winningest coach in NCAA history. And there were coaches making $2 million a year back then. And LaVell was nowhere near that. But you know what? He was fine with it. He had his Nike contract. He had his TV contract. He lived comfortably. But those days are over, to get and retain coaches.
Those days are over in BYU being able to
just hire people. They hired Doug Scoville at $19,000 a year, out of the NFL. And people coming to BYU, it's a great place to work. But with the head coaches now and especially assistant coaches, I mean, to get Jay Hill to leave as head coach at Weber State and come to BYU, I'm sure they had to offer him a very good salary.
Let's take a quick. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but now I'm gonna ask you as a fan, how do we keep Jay Hill?
Well, you're gonna have to continue to offer him a good salary, and I don't know if they'll need to do something like they did with Morgan Scally at the U, where you basically
assistant head
coach in waiting. Or, right. I mean, that's basically what they're calling him.
Although Kalani isn't, near retirement.
No, but
back in our day, it was you would become an assistant head coach, and the head coach would be happy to share part of,
Yeah, I don't know. Jay, we've got to definitely try to keep him happy, but he'll be a hot commodity, especially if we go on to have a truly phenomenal year. We're going to have a hard time hanging on to him because somebody.
Do you know him?
I don't know him well,
okay.
But it's a different game now. And with athletes, getting the basketball players we've gotten this year, I mean, it's NIL. Let's just call it like it is. We've been able to offer a lot of money. And I don't know how long the church is going to want to be in the game if it just becomes all about the money. Commissioner Gilbert said, we don't ever want to be pay to play. That would mess things up. Well, it's kind of like we are pay to play a little bit, and so I just hope that we can continue to be competitive financially, continue to recruit great players, and if it means we have to pay them NIL, and then we need to do that.
I'm pondering pay to play because in the business world, pay to play means, hey, you give me some money under the table and I'll let you in on the game. I'll let you in on this high revenue.
That used to be recruiting violations that we would see all over the country, right?
Right.
They're legal now. There's no more pay to play.
Okay, I understand. And so when we talk about pay to play, let's say we have this unbelievably talented young man, the Michael Jordan of the next 20 years. Or I see and my son plays basketball at Southern Virginia. So, to me, Michael Jordan was the best of all time. And now they're talking, well, no, it's obviously LeBron James, And so at their basketball, anyway, they're all arguing that LeBron James is the best of all time. Well, whoever is the GOAT, pay to play is a different issue than NIL, because now you're taking what used to be an amateur sport and you're paying theoretically what these young men and women are
what the market will pay for them.
Yeah, supply and demand, simple supply and demand. And we're providing the platform for them to show their skills. And then that platform enables us as an institution to collect revenues.
Yeah, and that expand our value. And
theoretically pay more than that pay to play.
Yeah.
And so if the missionary department can spend X dollars because we're bringing people unto Christ, I'm not saying the football or basketball programs are bringing people to Christ, but maybe they are in their own way, such as the Tabernacle Choir. So
absolutely.
So I don't know. I'm going way too far off base.
I think it's fine. I just hope it doesn't dominate college athletics.
Correct.
You and I played at a time when it was completely different. I was a walk-on. And
what year was that, Val?
75.
Okay.
I think we may have played in the JV game together.
I remember that.
If you use the word played very liberally, I did. That was my one road trip to St. George.
Remember, we had to get the inoculation because
on the rodeo grounds.
Rodeo grounds. Oh man, do we regret?
Yeah. Anyway. But it's, it is what it is now. And I think as long as we're going to commit to being in athletics at that level, we've got to play the game. And I salute those who've been able to pull it off so far. The only thing I really miss is that I think this is going to lead to a lot of people being one and done, where they play for 1 year and then they're gone, either the NBA or whatever.
Or the next down NIL that's a
transfer to somebody else. Yeah, we saw that last year with Khalifa. I really loved watching Khalifa play.
I did too.
And now he's gone, boom, he's gone.
But he did that to whoever we got him from.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I like that we have these coaches. Kalani is a player's coach for good this year. Sometimes we can say, oh, dang it, he could have been a little harder or tougher on some. But the players love the man. And so sometimes, like LaVell loved Provo and BYU, he stayed regardless of the fact, I know that the NFL wanted him for much higher dollars. So maybe and now Coach Kevin Young is attracting people because of his capacity to help build talent. Maybe we've got an edge. I don't know.
I think BYU has a built-in edge. A lot of people view it as a disadvantage. I always viewed it as an advantage. Our academics, our honor code, the lifestyle is a positive for people who want that kind of thing. And parents oftentimes want that kind of thing for their kids. And so it's a great thing. I'm just thrilled with what's going on right now in terms of what they're able to accomplish in all the sports. I mean, you watch the Olympics, you saw those BYU kids just, do themselves and the school proud.
You bet.
Phenomenal.
Val, we didn't even talk about your politics, what you did at UVU under Matt Holland, the president Matt Holland. You have led a truly Renaissance man life and are still involved writing your book and seeing you up there in your season tickets. What are your final thoughts for us today with our Beyond the Game group? Well,
we're just really fortunate. You and I have been around long enough to know how far we've come. I think 1975 when we played was LaVell's, third, maybe fourth season. And BYU football was really a doormat They were
We were only just starting to.
LaVell had won the year before.
That's right.
The conference championship. And so to see where the program has come, we've always been decent in basketball, won the NITs back in the earlier days, but to see what's happened now with the program, to see what things like BYU TV have allowed us to do, absolutely remarkable. And I just hope everybody doesn't take it for granted and continues to cheer for the Cougars and support them. That's what makes the program successful.
And that's what you and your family are doing, and that's what we'll keep doing. So thank you for being with us on Beyond the Game.
It's been fun, Mike. Thanks. We'll talk some more.
Val, look forward to finishing this, and then let's talk some more.
Let me just tell people, if they want to get this, it should be on Amazon anytime. Also, www.outofthebYUblue.com.
Okay.
It's a website. You can probably get it even at a little better price there, and in a few bookstores here and there. It's going to start appearing any day now.
Right. Yeah, because it just came out.
Yeah, it just barely came out.
Val Hale, thank you for what you do and have done.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for watching another episode of Beyond the Game. Remember to click here to subscribe and click here to watch our recent videos. Also, please follow us on social media. And remember, go Cougs.